Hi, friends. It's Sarah, the Fat Culture Critic. So, a year ago, I released a project I called One Scene for Hope, where I invited content creators to write about one scene in all of media that said something to them about hope. And the videos are lovely. The playlist is still up, and sometimes I still get submissions because there's no closing date on these. And then about 6 months ago, I did a second prompt, which was one scene that spoke to you about hope. And now I am releasing the third in this series, I guess. Um, and this time the idea is resistance. One scene that speaks to you about resistance. So instructions will be in the doobly-doo, and as long as you work in good faith and are careful about copyright, I will add your video to the playlist. Yeah, so and now let me introduce my video, one scene that speaks to me about resistance.
Bread and roses, bread and roses.
In the summer of 1910, workers' rights activist and suffragette Helen Todd was on a speaking tour of Illinois. And one night, at a place where she was staying, she spoke to the young servant who was working there about what she thought of the event. And the girl said, "It was that about the women voting, so everybody would have bread and flowers too." And according to Todd, that's how she came up with her slogan, which would become a poem, which would become a symbol and a song for the workers' movement and for women's suffrage. Bread and roses. 2014's Pride is one of my all-time favorite films. It is absolutely wonderful. It has the things that I love. You know, it has some good fat representation. It's super queer. And it's kind of bittersweet, which is one of the things that I love most in film. And it's based on a true story. And I think it would be helpful to have a little background. So let's talk about Britain in the 1980s. It was grim. Unemployment and inflation were running rampant, and Thatcher's ruthless, cruel Tory government was just making everything worse for poor people. The police were corrupt and brutal towards marginalized people at every opportunity, and there was a major health crisis being mishandled. Well, that's depressingly familiar. And if things were grim for most working people, they were abysmal for the coal miners. It was an awful industry, brutal to the earth and to the workers, but it was also the only way of life a lot of people had ever known. Victorian capitalism had demanded vast quantities of coal, and whole areas of the British Isles had most of their population dedicated to coal mining. The coal pits were brutal, but they were life to these people. And it was a way of life that was dying. Capitalism's demands had shifted to oil or mechanizing the mines, and the workers who had fed that insatiable demand for coal were surplus to requirements. They were left behind. The industry had been nationalized since the post-war years, and there had been a period of uneasy negotiation between the mine unions and the government to gradually reduce the people laboring in the industry over time. It had been a difficult time for a while, but not as difficult as what would come when Thatcher arrived. She wanted to break the unions and be done with the coal industry. Leading the miners at the time was a man called Arthur Scargill, a socialist who felt it was absolutely necessary to resist Thatcher.
As far as I'm concerned as the president of this union, I want to make it crystal clear and say publicly tonight, there can be no contract with a capitalist society that forces down the standard of life of every man, woman and child in the working class movement.
So an unstoppable force met an immovable object. the miners went on strike, and with Thatcher's brutal decision to break the unions, the government denied benefits to strikers' families and sequestered funds the National Union of Miners would have used to pay strike pay. So whole towns of people had no work and no funds, and the police around the country were then mobilized against those who picketed. Things were desperate and they needed support. And one of the groups that stood up to support them was a small group of queer folk working out of London. This is Mark Ashton, the real man who was played beautifully in the film by Ben Schnetzer. He was a socialist and an activist living in London in '84, and he and his friends began collecting for the miners. And because at the time support for the miners had to be given directly to towns instead of through the unions because of all the stuff the government was doing, they were twinned with a town called Delice. And so the queer folks in the town got to know each other. And this is where the film gets a lot of its comedic and dramatic tension, is the difficulty of building solidarity between people from very different worlds. It's a wonderful film, one of my favorites. And as I said, it has a bittersweet quality to it, I think, because, of course, watching from the future, I know that the mine strike is going to fail and the industry is going to be destroyed. But they don't know that. And just because a fight ultimately was unsuccessful doesn't mean it wasn't worth fighting for. It doesn't mean there weren't victories. And one of those victories is the solidarity that is built. That is where the happy ending of this film comes from. And solidarity is the thing I want to talk about. And I want to talk about one scene that I think really shows it. So the film I want to talk about is about 2/3 into the film, and it's on LGSM's second visit to Delice. It's the middle of winter, and the town folks are feeling it. They're low on food, they're without heat, and even the town's van is broken down, so they can't get to the picket lines. Everyone is gathered in the town hall, feeling low. Bill Nighy's character, Cliff, speaks about the pits and the history.
I lost my younger brother to that pit. 36 years old, but without it, these villages are nothing have finished. The pit and the people are one and the same.
And the camera shows Mark thinking and looking around and taking in the sense of defeat and utter hopelessness. And he makes a decision. Standing on the table, he speaks about the need to fight back.
It's not enough to always be defending. Sometimes you have to attack, to push forward.
They're going to do something, he says. He doesn't have the something. He just knows there needs to be something. He doesn't fully have the words, but the spirit rouses the people. And then there is a hush, and one voice out of the silence begins singing, and a few join, and more. Soon the whole room, all the townspeople are singing together. It's a familiar song to them. They know it well. The song is from the slogan that Helen Todd took from that young girl.
Bread and roses, bread and roses.
Life's bread, which is home, shelter, and security, and the roses of life, music, education, nature, and books.
And her slogan gained traction quickly in the 19-teens. It was a busy time of activism, and particularly the textile workers' strikes. And it became part of the imagery of workers' movements and women's movements. In 1911, the activist poet James Oppenheimer was inspired by the slogan and wrote the poem Bread and Roses, which was set to music first in 1917 and then again in 76 and in 88. The film uses the arrangement from 1976 by folk singer Mimi Farina, who was actually Joan Baez's sister. And here is the poem. Bread and Roses by James Oppenheim. As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, outnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing, their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits knew. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, marching, we bring the greater days. The rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler, tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses. Through the scene, as the townspeople join the singing, we see the camera isn't only following the singers. The camera's gaze moves around the room, and it shows various characters looking and being seen by one another. The LGSM people sit in silence watching the townspeople. The boys at the bar watch the older women sing. Di and his wife Margaret share a very eloquent look. It is a moment of recognition, one human to another, one group to another, recognizing the fellow human in the other. So if you do any social justice work or resistance or that sort of thing, you may have had moments that are a little like this. I know I have. Moments where things come together when you're doing a fundraiser together or working on a rally or just having serious conversations about change making, and solidarity happens and comes together, and you have that moment of recognition where the shared humanity in our struggles and the truth of the sharedness of our struggles, that there is fundamentally this sort of desire for bread and roses, sort of safety and dignity, and that there is this thing at the core that reflects our struggles to one another. I like to talk about it as it's the same tune on different instruments, and there are times when you do sort of tap into that tune, and it doesn't last. It doesn't last because, of course, we are so different, and our differences come back, and our differences are important. But it makes things complicated, and conflict is inevitable, and, well, roses have thorns, and it takes a lot of work to make bread. And I think that's why it's important that this scene comes later in the film, because it comes out of the work that they have done together and the work that they do on themselves and to communicate with each other. Because it is hard work. Solidarity is hard work, but it's beautiful. And I suppose it's how it is. To have the bread and roses, we must face the toil and the thorns. And like talking about thorns, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how I'm talking about a slogan that came out of the first wave of feminism. And although I couldn't find anything specific about Todd, she definitely had kept company with people who didn't really believe in the everybody, in that everybody will have bread and flowers too, that girl spoke to her, whose definition of everybody was suspect because she worked with people who were involved in eugenics. That was part of first wave feminism, as was their exclusion. And there is a sense, I think, the idea of bread and roses, the idea of liberation and rights has always been they're like beautiful seeds. but they've been always been planted in soil that is kind of infected with patriarchy and white supremacy and the ableism and all the other isms in our world. And so every generation, certainly in feminism, it feels like every generation there are these beautiful seeds do this from the rose bush of feminism certainly produces some bad thorns in every generation. There's been some drive to exclude some people from that everybody, but the seeds are still good. The ideas that we've been striving for are still worthwhile. It's just we have to keep working to try and plant them in better soil. And I think that's why it's important that this beautiful scene of singing and connecting and recognizing each other ends when some of the other townspeople enter the space to be homophobic. And some of the people who themselves were struggling at one point with their own homophobia step up and remove those guys. And that, I think, speaks to like this, to have the beauty, we have to do the work, and the work is often, it's on ourselves in order to be in solidarity with the other. The Delice people are taking care of their own who are stepping out of line so they can be in solidarity with the LGSM people. And I think back on those times that I have had those moments of recognition and how they've always come after I have done the work, and they've also always presented me with more work. But it's worth it, because I think that's how we try and get closer to having that safety and security, that bread, as well as the dignity and joy that is the roses. I watch this film when I find myself, of course, thinking of our time, which is also feels bleak in many ways, and with so many fights. And the inheritors of Thatcher's brutality are everywhere trying to take the roses of life from people and the bread of sustenance. There is so many people feel no safety. And there are so many fights. But I think the only answer is solidarity. But we don't get that if we don't recognize that we have to do the work. But it is so worth the work, because there is so much beauty in solidarity.
Honor shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Hi, friends. Thanks for sticking to the end. I want to thank my patrons for supporting me. And you can join them if you like, or you can support me with a one-time donation on Ko-fi or on YouTube's super thanky thing. The links should be on YouTube for you to do that. And I have a couple other videos in the works. I have recorded and I'm editing a discussion of My Fair Lady that I put on shelf so I could get this one out. But it should be coming soon, and I'm working on a longer video about healthism that I've gotten a number of people contributing to, and I'm not sure when that will come out, but it's in the works. So yeah, there are things coming. And I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you will make a video of your own, perhaps talking about a scene that speaks to you about resistance. Or you can continue adding to the hope and joy playlists. I think they're all kind of linked a bit. There's a common theme. So, yes, thank you. And yeah, take care.